Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, you guys have been loving the LazerPig commentary that I've been doing because the last video I did a couple days ago was doing really well, and it was about kind of updates on the Russia-Ukraine war because it's now been a year later. Now, one of the things of that video I had talked about was I was kind of making fun of the idea of T-34's, especially being used now. And I got a bunch of comments on the video that were like, LazerPig did a T-34 video. So I'm going right to it. I have a whole queue of course, so many videos I'm going to watch. And I was like, let's just go right to it and check this out. Again, thanks to LazerPig for letting me comment on these videos. The original video link is going to be down below. Make sure you're supporting over there. Give it a view, a like, subscription, and all that good stuff. All right, down below too, you might find some other links to some things you might like our Discord server, my gaming channel, which I hope to get back on and doing some more streaming content, as well as like Instagram, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. All right, let's get started. All right, I got my army gear on. Let's go.
I think it has become a bit of a meme at this point, especially among those of the typical military shitposting crowd, as to when we might see the deployment of T-34's to the front line. The idea that Russia might deploy its reserves of T-34 tanks has become such a focus for many people that any possibility of a sighting of one has been latched onto with the same mannerism as a starved cocaine addict attacking a bag of flour.
All right, so I'm assuming if you're coming here, you probably know about the T-34 tank, but if you don't, and I'm glad you're here too, is a World War II tank used by the Soviet Union. And, you know, pretty good for its time, but it's been a long time since then. So let's see what we got.
The Second World War medium tank, though most that are still around, were...
I will say the T-34s do look pretty cool. They do got like the classic look. Let's all be honest, and I got hate for this over Discord. The World War I tanks were all really ugly. All right, let's be honest with that. But they did serve kind of a different function because it was mostly just about getting through no man's land and over trenches, and World War II tanks are more mobile and all that. But come on, aesthetics matter, okay?
Post-war constructions is one of World War II's most persistent tanks, with many countries still holding at least one in service, even if they are largely kept in reserve.
But ain't broke, don't fix it.
A significant stockpile of working T-34s that are technically in service.
You gotta love it when they pull out this stuff though every once in a while, you know, on the Red Square and stuff like that. You know, it brings up the pride to bring out your old stuff there.
That service is in much the same way that the British 1759 first-rate ship-of-the-line HMS Victory is still technically in service and still technically the flagship, ship, but its use is largely ceremonial.
Oh, see, look how much cooler ships were. Yes, they're very functional now, the battleships and all this stuff, but they don't have the classiness that these old ships had. Look at that.
They're not going to sail it into battle anytime soon. As much as I wish they would.
Yeah,
the use
exactly.
of
I agree.
T-34s is almost exclusive to parades, memorial events, film shoots, or for hire by reenactors.
And the Soviet Union has every reason to celebrate their victory over Nazi Germany in World War II, the incredible amount of lives that they sacrificed in bringing down Nazism and things like that. So all power to you. Bring them out.
They are in no way equipped to be actual reserve tanks, nor expected to see battle anytime soon. I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I'm not. I lied. But since the Second World War, there has been an odd tradition that in any war Russia participates in, a T-34 shows up, even if it has been deployed by the opposing side. And with Russia now having lost over 5,000 armored vehicles in Ukraine, the question not far from anyone's...
And he made this, I think I saw his videos about 4 months ago. So that's like 6 months time. How much they've lost there. So add that to whatever it is now.
Is when will Putin send them in? Now, of course, Russia might
if it's
be
the last
a little
resort,
bit desperate. A little bit desperate.
That's the thing too, AKs, man, those aren't going away. AK is such a good gun. It's still like a preferred thing in a lot of places, and they've held up well for decades.
But I don't think they are that desperate. At least not yet. But the thing is, the idea of a T-34 potentially seeing action in this conflict, even if it is just as a training vehicle, is not that far-fetched. Now, not that long ago, we saw some evidence that Russia was deploying its older reserve T-62 tanks, and I thought, well, this was at the time, which was a few months ago by now. They're doing mass recruitment. They're trying to raise new divisions, and 2 out of the 800-man divisions they are supposedly going to try and raise are armored divisions. Surely these older tanks will be training vehicles or in use by rear guard reserve divisions. I was wrong. I was so very wrong. A number of T-62Ms, which is basically just a normal T-72A but with better optics and the option for a guided missile system, were spotted in and around the city with the unpronounceable name. This is me. I'm not even going to attempt that.
I'm gonna try.
In and around the city with the unpronounceable name.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Lysychansk. Nailed it.
This is me. I'm not even going to attempt that. And several T-62 MVs, which is basically just...
Dude, they could fly, though. Look at the 62s, dude. They could fly. Yeah, you're obviously going to be using these a lot more before you head up to the 34s, but...
Onto it had been encountered around
they got some speed to them.
Exactly why these tanks are now on the front lines has been a topic of some debate, and theories of Russia having lost far more tanks than current estimates to a simple problem of supply issues has been thrown about.
I gotta say, I would love to just sit on the end of a tank like that while they're flying down the road, sitting on the roof, the hood.
The thing is, these tanks should not be on the front lines, and the fact that they are shows a rather severe problem with the reality we envision when it comes to Russian armored divisions. Because if we take our current understanding of Russian tank numbers, Russia would have to lose 3 times as many tanks as it currently has before it even begun to run out of reserve T-72s alone. Its tank losses would have to be heading close to the tens of thousands before T-62s started to come out of the warehouse.
Basically saying, look at these training grounds. They just like fly over the cars and stuff. Basically, you can see what he's saying here is if it's coming down to that, it's time to give up the war. But any predictions and stuff like this, I feel like about the Ukraine war, like you can't hold to them. You know what I mean? Like nobody thought it would happen, and then when it happened, it was like, no way will they do this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing, and it just like keeps defying logic in so many ways.
So what is going on? Well, firstly, I have to do a little bit of deprogramming you. There is a huge, an alarmingly huge number of people who are under the impression that the Russian military complex works purely as a patriotic program, that companies and their engineers are motivated not by greed and by the...
No country does that. No country does that.
Promise of an early retirement and a fat paycheck like those fat cats down at the Pentagon, but driven by the desire for their country to be seen as the greatest, to show off their skills and expertise to the greater world by producing far superior, greater crafted weapons of a much higher quality than that of the United States. That is not true. Russia has the same problems as America does when it comes to its industrial military complex, just in different ways. To put it bluntly, it's corrupt as fuck. The corruption...
Well, it's about money, and it's so easy. The government pays such high overvalue, will pay for these stuff, for these contracts and stuff, and it's incredibly profitable. It's incredibly profitable. But yeah, it comes these bidding wars, but still they overpay and make a lot of money, and it can be sketchy, for sure.
In any Russian government department makes the Pentagon look like a sitcom from the 70s. Slightly racist and everyone's off their tits on cocaine, but your dad finds it funny. Not only is Russia corrupt, corruption is almost a way of life. I mean, I've witnessed it firsthand. One of my ex-boyfriends is Russian. I've been to Russia, and I've been lectured by former Russian military veterans, granted with the translator because it's a big old Russian guy trying to speak English and a big old Scottish guy trying to speak English. On the corruption they partook in, and why it was not only necessary, but almost seen as a rite of passage.
What is going on?
They don't really see it as corruption, per se. That any side hustle you might have is just kind of seen as a perk. If your workplace gets a shiny new lamp and you're the manager, well, that lamp is yours. Everything in that office belongs to you. You're the manager. You can take it home and sell it later if you like. That's fine in the eyes of the public. And anyone who doesn't take advantage of that is almost looked down upon with suspicion, because if you're not taking advantage of it, then you're probably a pencil pusher who is going to rat out everybody else, so no one really trusts you.
That's the unfortunate reality of so many industries, right? And especially the military industrial complex. It's like, if you're not getting involved in some semi I don't know, sleazy ways, then you're not doing it right. Right? Then you're not trying hard enough. Anyway.
Now, I hear you cry, what does that have to do with tank numbers? Shut up, I'm getting there.
Are they struggling?
Well,
They're
one
struggling
of the
to
least
make the
respected,
tanks.
lowest paid, and easiest jobs in the Russian army is the commander of a supply depot. It's a dead-end job, and for the majority of their life, someone who runs a supply depot is not really expected to do much. They fill in paperwork, they occasionally grant requisition requests, but if your supply depot is a stockpile, those requisition forms are never really going to come in, and when they do, they don't exactly ask for much. Your life is going to be bitter, boring, and highly underpaid. So if you want to sell off some of those old tanks at the very end of the yard off for scrap metal, well, I mean, no one's going to miss them, are they? Spare parts for your Lada? Sure, I can sell you something. Hey, you want a box of grenades? Seriously, when I was visiting my ex many years ago, he walked straight into a supply depot and purchased a box of grenades straight from the fucking commander, who was sitting on a box of ammunition, smoking. Fucking legend.
Reminds me, you ever seen that movie, is it War Dogs? With Jonah Hill? Which, that was based off like a true story and probably exacerbated or whatever, but like it's the same idea, how like easy it actually is to get this stuff if you really know where to look.
He had the prices set up on the wall behind him and even asked if I'd like a souvenir.
How much
and tried
vodka?
to sell me a Tokarov.
Yo, 5 vodkas for like 334.
Even asked if I'd like a souvenir and tried to sell me a
Worth it. You might be able to get that. Maybe get the mini AK.
Tokarov. It was amazing. We sat throwing sack grenades into the forest one night and kept score of how many trees we could knock over. It was very romantic. Me and my ex did that, not me and the commander. That would have been weird. But also, if your local hunter needs a new rifle and some ammo, sure, smuggler comes a knocking, or maybe your favorite friendly neighborhood arms dealer.
I never saw that one. That one's a similar idea, right? The Nicolas Cage one. Is that one War Dogs? This is the one with Jonah Hill, where he's an arms dealer and like gets armed for the government. Am I mixing those up? Let me know down below. If I already messed up, I'm sure it's already getting filled up.
For an arms dealer than the combination of disgruntled soldiers and warehouses full of weapons.
Seriously, the memoirs of a Colombian drug lord, Ludwig Fannberg, are worth a read if you haven't already. He admitted the Russian mafia was prepared to sell him a nuclear submarine plus captain and crew to smuggle cocaine into the US.
Well, one of these problems that they have with is when they have like a ton of extra. You have extra guns, or like you're an arms dealer or something like that, and you lose your contract and you're sitting on these like stockpiles of weapons. And unfortunately, what ends up happening to those sometimes is because who's going to buy large stockpiles of weapons if it's not the military? Then it's on the black market, and that stuff unfortunately heads out to drug cartels, terrorist organizations, and militias and things like that. So yeah, it's hard. There's money to be made, but you can't do it, you know, with military contracts. There's ways to give it into the hands of, you know, bad dudes.
Allegedly, he was even asked with missiles or without. This was
You can
the
just
point
buy
he
a sub,
decided that,
nuclear sub.
He didn't want to do this anymore. They get away with this kind of shit because no one is ever going to request this stuff. No one is ever going to ask for it. No one is checking on you. No one is counting it. No one is even really sure how much you had to begin with. So if you run a stockpile depot that says you have 600 tanks and someone comes along and asks you, how many tanks do you have here? Are you really going to stand up and say, sure, let me go count them all? No. You're going to say, I have 600 tanks.
Yep.
And the inspector will nod and walk away because he isn't going to count them all either. No one is going to check that because no one else is counting. Because, well, paperwork says you have 600 tanks. You say you have 600 tanks. Inspector says you have 600 tanks. You have 600 tanks. How many tanks are actually in the depot? That's a bit dubious at best. Second to that, in order to help pay for the modernization of Russia's military and to keep the country afloat in the 90s, Russia began selling off its older reserve tanks, in particular the T-72.
The Russian military had spent so much money in their failed war in the 80s against Afghanistan. You know, reason why, you know, the Soviet Union collapses is because of those economic problems that they had. and a lot of that, yeah, from military spending. And that's not just with Afghanistan. Go to like the arms race and how much of the budget the Soviet Union had to pay to try to keep up with the United States, and with it being a larger percentage of the Soviet Union's budget than say like the American budget. And yeah, and like in the 80s, the arms race was being won by the Soviet Union, especially when it came to nuclear weapons and stuff like that, but at an incredible economic cost that they were unable to, maintain that burden. And, one of the many reasons why they're going to collapse.
If you cast your mind back to before the Ukraine invasion at the Tank Olympics, often accused of being a propaganda-controlled scripted event for the cameras, the T-72 topped out gold in every category. And surprise, surprise, the result meant that a decent number of nations looking to replace their aging tank fleets suddenly wanted the new model T-72s being offered. New T-72s started showing up in Nigeria, Kenya, Algeria, Armenia, India, Slovakia, Siberia, Czechia, Syria, Uganda, Venezuela, and Vietnam, though Vietnam is allegedly yet to receive theirs. I wonder why. What this means is the 3,000 T-72s the Russians supposedly have in reserve may or may not actually exist. We don't know how many have been sold off or lost by the stockpile commanders, or how many had their engines sold off or cannibalized for spares by active units. No one has updated the count since 2012, and that count was more than likely based off paperwork that was signed off in 1997. This is why the Russians are now digging out the T-62s, tanks that were marked as obsolete in the 70s. And they don't exactly have a lot of them. Supposedly they have around 2,000 of them, all of which were supposed to have been scrapped in 2013.
Wow. Like literally scrapped?
Roughly 500 of them were transferred to the Syrian army sometime in 2015, leaving allegedly 600 vehicles of various marks to have been reactivated.
It went to their ally. Syria is an ally of the of Russia.
Invasion.
If you didn't know.
The conditions of these tanks varies greatly, and several Russian tankers who were captured and
you can fix them up, right?
admitted they surrendered because their tank just didn't work. Statistically, if we go by what we know, what I know anyway, what I've been told by former Russian officers, and what has been estimated by British
LazerPig knows former Russian officers.
Roughly 1/3 of these T-62s are in working order, or can be brought quickly back into working order. Another third requires slightly longer, more dedicated repairs, and the final third are spare parts. Basing on the conditions,
Because are they making the parts anymore? I mean, that's got to be the biggest issue.
The Ukrainians are finding these tanks in, and by the supposed confessions of their crew, Russia has taken that second third and just thrown them into combat regardless. And as this war continues, more from that second third are going to be arriving on the front line.
That guy crashed.
We've already seen convoys of T-62s lacking ERA protection, hatches, or even gun barrels. Also keep in mind the T-62 does not have an autoloader, meaning any T-62 on the battlefield must have to be loaded manually, which means an extra crew member being required to do something that Russia has absolutely no training for. But T-62s are somewhat fitting to that old Russian stereotype, rugged and reliable. They're easy to use, and there's nothing really much that can go wrong with them. Now, granted, you can't just cold start an engine that's been sitting around exposed to the elements for 40 years.
Do tanks use normal like car keys? No. You know.
But it is part of the Russian tanker training to pick out a tank from the depot and get it working again. This is what my ex did. He was a tank driver. Because he's 5'4", so obviously they'd grab him and put him in a tank.
That's true.
In the fucking
you don't want the big Russians. You don't want Ivan Drago in there. You gotta have the little guys, the small kings.
That was a terrible Russian impression. Sorry. Get in tank, shorty. I'll stop now. Anyway,
German,
with partial mobilization and massed force conscription now underway across Russia, somewhere between 300,000 and 1.2 million conscripts are about to go through roughly a month of training in about 2 weeks' time before being redeployed to the front line.
That's how many of us, a whole
this
mob.
Means Russia has about 2 weeks to find equipment for 1 million people, and among these new recruits, it is hoped to raise somewhere between 2 to 4 additional armored divisions. Good luck there. Now keep in mind the 1st Guards tank division has been completely wiped out. They don't exist anymore. The 4th have lost almost all their tanks, and the 3rd arrived in Kherson with T-62s, of which only half were operational.
Amazing. Ukraine was outfitted with, especially with foreign support from so many anti-tank weaponry that it, so devastating. Yeah, it's why like a video like this even has to exist, is showing how poorly it went. initially there.
Russia is still producing tanks on the more modern T-90 variants, but is lacking a good supply of steel to maintain output, so production has
a lot
been
of scrap
slowed
metal, though,
somewhat
there.
and concentrated mostly on getting their older variants up to a modern standard. What tanks they do produce are more than likely to be earmarked for people already well trained on their use. More than likely, they'll just re-equip the 4th Guard, who made the probably correct decision to abandon their vehicles and save the crews during the counterattack in Kherson. As I keep trying to remind people, you can rebuild a tank, you can't rebuild a human life. So for these new divisions, raw recruits, most of them who have seen service but might not have ever served in a tank before, the options are somewhat
like
limited. Typically, we are looking at one of 3 possibilities, or knowing Russia, a combination of all 3. The most likely scenario being that they have a lot more T-62s than current estimates, and will continue to supply these forces with a mixture of old tanks. Second scenario, they will supplement the lack of tanks with armored vehicles of the BMP and BTR series. Third scenario, well, they may still somehow have reserves of old T-54 and T-55 tanks. I mean, they claim they don't have any of these left, but they also claim not to have any T-62s left, so, you know, that was a lie. So how many they have is actually a matter of some debate. They could start raiding museums for tanks. There are supposedly around 30 T-54s and 55s of mixed variants at Kablinka and Patriotic Park, which, though not combat ready, are in considerably better condition than most of the T-62s. These are your most likely scenarios. The T-62 that we have seen on the front lines have largely been in use by the DPR forces, which are typically the people you see with the Second World War rifles and equipment, or in use as indirect fire weapons to replace the heavy number of artillery guns they've lost. So option 1, most likely scenario. But it is fun to speculate. Assuming they have no T-55s, and they actually run out of T-62s, or for whatever reason,
then it's T-34 time, baby.
What else can they do? Well, surprisingly, quite a lot before they'd even consider deploying T-34s. Russia's allies, such as Belarus, as well as countries aligned with or within Russia's sphere of influence, such as India, do hold a large number
India is so interesting to look at as a nation that's part of the non-aligned movement, trying to maintain independence, but like, you know, being very favorable towards the Soviet Union, having this kind of like agreement of friendship and stuff like that.
Tanks, and Russia could request them as part of its anti-terrorist campaign, or more than likely just outright buy them. China has also been gradually creeping up on Russia as one of the main arms suppliers for budget militaries, and it would be more than willing to sell off some of its older model tanks, but probably not its newer stuff. I'm not so sure the Chinese are really willing to risk watching an entire division of their brand new battle tanks get blown up by Western firearms, or worse, risking one getting captured. Now, I'm not particularly worried if they do. I have seen quite a lot of propaganda videos on these tanks in actions and noticed there's quite a lot. That bit of gun wobble there. Strong potential, that gun is not stabilized.
Inferior tanks
to stop to fire accurately, which makes them pretty fucking vulnerable.
Oh, look at the blue ones, those are sick.
What happens when you're in a tank that has to stop during the middle of a battle? And if Ukraine gets more modern NATO tanks, such as the Abrams and the Leopard 2, which has been proposed and is not completely
how would they get Abrams
table, then,
tanks?
Okay, yeah, I say it all the time. Tanks do more than just fight other tanks, but at the same time, if your enemy is able to field much better tanks, and
that's all you need to know. If you're an army and you're you know, you want to see demonstrations from the different companies that make tanks, it just, you gotta, if you pass the beer test, you've got yourself the contract.
Tanks, but at the same time, if your enemy is able to field much better tanks and much more powerful tanks than you can, you're not going to have an easy time, especially if you're from an army that typically tends to rely on tanks to form the armored fist of any assault. So, can we expect T-34s on the front lines?
Doesn't sound like
push. Maybe. It's very possible.
If it is, he's wrapping up here, the war is in a very, very desperate situation.
As more T-62s find their way into Russian hands, there will be less to supply the DPR and other local insurrection forces. Even as these units get merged into the Russian army,
they're still cool.
Russia goes through with annexing most of eastern Ukraine, these units are not likely going to get better treatment. So there is a slim, very slim possibility that at some point they might end up with a T-34 or two, probably stolen from a museum. But as actual Russian frontline units, Maybe in 100 years' time, when the hordes of the Vatnik warriors from the Zealands face off against the united dog tribes of Nafo over the last few precious drops of gamer girl bathwater in the radiation-filled apocalyptic wastelands, we might see T-34's used in battle once again. And perhaps on that day you'll wonder what all of this was ever about. What started this war, even if it was ever worth it. And on the horizon, a towering shape will block the sunlight from your eyes. A hand will gently pat you on the shoulder, and a voice will ask, "Warriors, what is best in life?"
Genghis Khan. Pillage their land, to take their horses, to see those that they love in tears. Back in 2015, the Russians wanted a parade commemorating the T-34 in support of World War II. They did not actually have enough working T-34s, so they bought a bunch from Laos, exchanging 72s for T-34s on a one-to-one basis. What a deal. These T-34s, and consequently all the T-34s on Victory Day parades, Czechoslovakian T-34s built in 1955. Holy crap. So they sold them all, and it makes sense. Like, once they became obsolete, sell them to somebody that doesn't have tanks at all. So, but it's a problem when you're selling them to a 1-to-1 ratio with your newer models, like we're apparently doing there. I mean, how many do you need for the
what the
for the
fuck
parade
did I just make? Nah, fuck it, I'm not changing it now.
All right, final words. And I want you tank people to chime in here. All right, tank nerds, I know you're out there because I hear all the time. You're on Discord, you're in the comments. Let me know what else we need to know about tanks, especially in the modern era here. But, like, you guys that are into it, how do you think the T-34s would do right now? Now, would it even be worth trying if you become desperate that much? Or again, is the anti-tank weaponry again out here right now, just like, gonna annihilate them? But like what he was saying there at the end, though, I mean, they're already having a problem. They couldn't even get tanks, enough T-34s to do their commemoration parades and stuff like that. So, will it ever come down to using the World War II tanks? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. But I guess, again, it would be interesting to see that kind of blast from the past in modern warfare. But again, there's plenty of stuff that just keeps getting used. We're talking about AKs, which, comes a little later. But, some of these designs and stuff that have held up with the test of time, and people still use them. So anyway, now, if you had not seen the video I just did before this, this video was kind of adding on to the last one we did, which was update on from doing commentary on LazerPig's video on an update about the Ukraine war. Definitely check that out. I'll link it up here as the video is ending, and you can check that out. Again, thank you again to LazerPig for letting me do this, and all of you for recommending it. And with that, we'll see you next time. Bye.